Happy Friday, my friends. It's December 18th. We call it Friday, not Friday, because we're excited about it, because my wife is off all weekend, and this should be so much better than having all the kids on remote learning. And anyway, we're here for episode 330 of the Thadcast. And I've got to tell you, if there was ever one where we kind of dove into the serioso side of life, this is probably going to be it, okay? So let's just dig in, and we'll just figure this thing out as we go. Is that okay? All right, so we're going to talk about the truth today. We talk about the truth a lot, but I want to share with you a personal story, and that'll lead into some very important words that Jesus has for our world, and not just for his disciples, but for us to consider today. Well, first, I want to share a passage, and it's from 1 Corinthians 13, and it talks about love. And you know how it goes. Love is patient, love is kind, and it goes on to just create this idea of love being so good and so wonderful, which, by the way, if you didn't know, it most certainly is. Love is a wonderful thing. In fact, it's part of the first two commandments: love God, love folks. I think that's the way it is in the NLT version, is folks, love folks. And so a part of the story, though, is that people tend to in our culture today, the truth tends to get a little bit whitewashed. In fact, the people who will proclaim the most love for others often, who do this publicly, and they plead for love, they want everybody to be unified. Often they forsake the truth. And it's important to understand the distinctions of such and how this should really work in this. And I'm going to give you an example maybe that'll tie this all back to what Jesus is going to tell us, okay? All right, I don't mean to meander or wander around. You'll see as it goes, okay? I promise. So this is gonna be pretty intense, what I'm gonna talk about. So in 2013, in March, I came home to my house one day after a day's work. I had no clue, and there was a note left by my current wife at the time for me, saying that she had left and taken the kids, and they had gone to move to Chicago with her mother, which obviously to me was like, what? Like, I was just shocked, devastated, like, holy cow. So I reached out to her, and finally she called me, and we talked, and that was when she started to begin to claim abuse, that I had been abusive to her, which was a surprise and a shock to me. I told you all this was going to be real. So I'm understanding these initial allegations of what she's saying, and like anyone in what they think is a good marriage, I love my wife, and she's got this story for me, and this story is basically, and as it was written out to the doctors later, is when I would go to sleep at night, I would fall asleep into a trance-like state. I would somehow awaken and begin to attack her. And that was pretty much the gist of it. So even in this claim, I actually never knew what was going on, if you could imagine such a thing. So I'll give you the end of that story so we can get past that part of the drama, okay? So I went through the testing and talked to the doctors, and they wanted to let me know in no uncertain terms, and almost made me feel crazy for believing her. But what do you do? What do you do? What do you do when someone who you love and you trust does something like this and says this about you? And they're not saying that you're doing it intentionally, right? Because you're awake and you know what you're doing when you're awake. But they've convinced you that when you don't know what you're doing, your subconscious somehow is abusing another person. That was the complete story. And so I remember after she had left, my elder, who I'd been so close to for so many years, came over to my house to talk. And it was just me and him, because my kids and my wife were gone. And I remember sitting there just kind of feeling very strange in this conversation. And he asked me point blank, and I will tell you the intensity of this moment was not lost on me. He asked me point blank if I had abused my wife. And I said, from what she has told me, I would say that answer is yes. Because of what she had told me. And there was no reason not to believe her, at least so I thought. Okay? I told you this is going to get in there, all right? And as he's sitting across from me, I notice a lot has changed in one of my he was a very close friend of mine. In this good friend of mine. His posture had changed. His demeanor had changed. He was not the friend that I knew. He was almost robotic. Almost like he was waiting to catch me in something. Like an aha moment that they were going to have, that he was going to have with me. And so I sat there and I just wanted to be, as kind and loving to everyone. And I knew what she wanted was for me to admit that I had some type of mental problem, that I realized that something was wrong. And I was willing to do anything to save my marriage, right? Wouldn't you, if you're married, wouldn't you want to do anything to save your marriage? And that was it. So I decided that I was going to believe her. And I told him, I said, well, this is the story that she's told, and I believe her. And I believe her. And so in this moment, I have confessed to be somebody who is abusing his wife. Mind you, this is something that's not lost on me, the power of this moment, of what I said in this moment. I was, fortunately for my sake, extremely specific. That, of course, I had no memory. I was supposedly asleep or in some type of trance-like state when all of this had happened. And that was her claim the entire time. What I didn't understand is he and she had been talking a lot behind my back, along with a couple of other people, about all of this. And this had been going on even beforehand, the connections that were built and the conversations going on before I was made aware of any of this. And so like I said, the story has a good ending. In fact, so much so that two psychiatrists were adamantly, intensely, almost belligerent with me to see the truth. And even though I loved my wife and I loved these people, this friend of mine, in so many ways, they wanted to hear me say something that just wasn't true. And I somewhat obliged them. I didn't go further than what I needed to know to be the truth. But what I should have said is, I've never heard a story of someone specifically attacking someone while they were actually asleep. And you do research on this. We got this thing called the internet. You can look this stuff up. It simply has not happened. And at least no credible or verifiable story that was out there. So long story short, early on in these moments, as wild and crazy and even seemingly wrong as it was, because of the way that I felt about these people, I was willing to sacrifice what I knew as the truth to appease them, to make them feel okay. And the selfish side of me wanted them to be okay with me, right? Oh, maybe that's not too selfish. I mean, heck, it's your wife, it's your elder, and one of your best friends, right? I mean, wouldn't you want them to be okay? I think God understands that, right? He's not like, hey, you should be a brick wall. No, he knew that I was broken and I was hurting and I was just a disaster of emotions. And this had come at me like a baseball bat where I had no clue. I turned around and it was like bang, 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 bang. All these accusations, all this stuff happened. And looking back on that time, God, more than anyone, pursued a public outcry, a screaming resounding of the truth. Because by the end of it, not only had there been a written confession of the lies told against me, not only had the state gotten involved and said in a document that the children need to be placed in the father's care immediately, not only was all of this the precipice of me getting sole custody of my children and a restraining order, all of this What it really was the path of God's truth being made known in this specific situation. Now, I don't wish to have gone back and changed much about what I did. I don't, because it all played out exactly how it was supposed to. And today I'm just celebrated 6 years of marriage to like the most phenomenal woman in the world. My kids and I are doing great. We're celebrating Christmas together. That's a part of my life that is long gone. The relationship with the elder never healed, even though I pursued healing with that. He refused to sit down and talk to me once all the facts came out, which in some ways doesn't cement my heart against him at all, but it cements my heart in that the truth mattered to me and matters to Jesus more than it's going to matter to some people, even to those who claim Jesus is king. And that man was no longer an elder the next thing I knew, after all of this story broke out. And I was part of that story, writing a very detailed, about 12-page letter to my church about the truth and about exactly what had happened and everything involved in the situation, because it's good to be honest, right? The truth matters to God so very much that he will move mountains for it to be proclaimed. He will do that. I mean, how many guys do you know who've been accused of basically those types of things I was accused of and ended up a year later with sole custody of their children and completely proof that they didn't do anything in their sleep, not only scientifically, but a confession. So none of that was done by me. None of that was done by people, although people were involved. All of this was the will of God. Jesus says in Matthew 24:4, Jesus told them, don't let anyone mislead you. And he goes on in this chapter, read it, Matthew 24, to talk about everything that's going to happen in the world, how people will be deceived by a fake Messiah, how there will be wars and threats of wars and problems in our culture. And Jesus is talking about our world, national issues, and that Christians will be persecuted and you will be persecuted for your faith. And is this true today? I can say it because I've had death threats against me. I had someone who was targeting me for my faith. In fact, somebody who was near me, one of my bosses, broke down in tears and she said, you're being persecuted for your faith. And it's not to make anything about me. This is the reality of the world we live in today. We're already there in so many ways. And it says sin will be rampant everywhere, and the love of many will grow cold. What is so important, my friends, is that we get back to this first passage. Don't you dare let anyone mislead you. I put the dare thing in. That's not Jesus' words. Don't you dare. Don't let anyone mislead you. The truth is in front of you. And if you and I are not the flag bearers of that truth, we've got bigger problems than you and I can even imagine. I go back and I look at that time in my life, and I don't have any regrets, but I know now if I'm ever faced with anything like that again, I will pursue the truth and make the truth known, because that matters so very much as a father, as a husband, as a community leader, as the host of the Thadcast, as your friend. The truth matters to me and you. And I've got to tell you, I spend time with guys now I actually spent time about 9 months ago with a man who had been accused of things falsely by his wife. And he was so broken and beaten, and he told me he gave up. He totally gave up. And she's going to get everything. She's going to get money. He's barely able to see his kids. You know, he's all these things are going on. And he threw in the towel. And I told him about the truth. And I told him how much the truth matters to Jesus. Do not be misled. Our culture is saying things right now, today, and they say these things are good and they are kind and they are the right way to treat people, but they rail against the word of God. So you and I got to make up our mind. Does everybody get to go to heaven? Is it a blank statement for the world and Jesus' life was worthless? I mean, think about it. He was beaten, flogged, persecuted constantly, tempted by the devil himself. All these things went on in his life, and he ended up getting, dragging across the weapon of death through the streets of Jerusalem as he was mocked and hung and died. Now he rose again, but I'm coughing. It's okay. But what he went through was absolutely incredible. Incredibly torturous existence in his last days until his resurrection. So did that mean anything to you? Or does everybody just get a free pass and they can do what they want? The scriptures don't tell us that. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. But people will tell you, oh, that's not the kind path. That's not the right path. Let me tell you, the kind path is always attached to the truth. Love is kind, and it is honest, and it is attached to the truth. My friends, the truth matters. And if you and I aren't going to stand up for it today, who will? If you and I aren't going to preach the good news because of who Jesus is and what Jesus has done, who will? I know it's hard. I know that you don't want to be bullied. I know that you don't want to have a difficult time with people. But I urge you and encourage you today to do whatever you can, whatever you possibly can, to cement yourself in the truth of God's word, to breathe in those foundations, and to breathe out the truth. It doesn't mean that we're unkind. It doesn't mean that we're here to pick fights and argue. What it means is we are living in a space where God can be glorified by our lives, even when we're persecuted. And that's the gist of it. We need to be doing the heavy lifting right now, my friends. The truth matters more than maybe it's mattered before in your life. Okay? I'm not saying all of history. I'm just saying right now, the truth matters. Don't be led astray by the teachings of mankind and humanism and our world today. What the world says is right is often wrong. And by securing yourself in God's word, you will live on a path of freedom and grace, and you will live in the truth. We need to be beacons of hope, but we also need to be beacons of the truth, my dear friends. And I hope my story encourages you today. The repercussions of me not sticking to the truth early on when those accusations were made were many. And that was difficult. And I should have just been a harbinger of the truth, stuck and mired in it so much. Just absolutely bathing in the truth. That's got to matter, especially in the most intense moments of life. So, I hope this episode encouraged you today. Thank you for joining me for your Friday episode number 330. As always, join our Facebook group called The Thadcast. I mean, what else would we call it, right? If you can do a rating and review on iTunes, that's great. Share this with a friend or on social media. Always helps me out a little bit as we build up our listener base. It's growing. It's always growing, folks. It's been so good. It's been so good. Well, I hope you have a great weekend. Merry Christmas. I will be back, though, on Monday. We'll probably talk about Christmas all next week. I love it so much. And until next time, my dear friends, may you be blessed.